Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to the IT Hour. My name is Ben Garrison, technical champion here at JumpCloud. I'm joined today with a host of lovely and wonderful people, a whole panel. We got Becky, we got Scott, Alexa, and Tom. We'll have introductions here in a moment. The IT Hour is a community-led conversation. It's a coffee talk, right? So just imagine if we're all sitting around a table at a coffee shop or at your local pub, bar, and having a conversation around a certain IT topic. Today's IT topic is going to be specific around Apple, Mac passwords and password resets and potentially getting locked out. So we'll talk about all the nuances with that from a technical perspective on our technical deep dive. And we brought some really, really smart experts in to have those conversations. So again, this is a collaborative and a very engaging conversation. So do not hesitate to communicate in chat, good, bad, or ugly. You can also ask a question, and I will curate those and go through those as we go through the conversation. And also, we have room for one more. I think a few might actually drop off from the camera. But if you do want to come on stage, you can come on stage. Just know that if you do, your voice, your face, and your likeness will be recorded and syndicated across the internet, because this does go on our YouTube at youtube.com/JumpCloud. So now that that's all out of the way, we're going to do some brief updates around our community as well as our meetups. And then we will go right into our topic today, which is the Apple and Mac password management and resets. So we'll just start off and kick it off with Becky. Do you want to do a brief introduction and your updates, please?
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Becky Scott. I'm the Senior Manager of Community at JumpCloud. And what is going on in community? We are still working on getting ready with the forums. And that should actually launch at the end of the month. And really what that means is they're going to be ready at the end of the month. Going to be in kind of like a soft launch period where we will have a handful of people come in and do some beta testing and kind of get some content ready. So like we've said before, anyone who wants to jump in and do some early testing and play around the community a little bit early, a few perks involved in that we'll tell you about if you decide you want to come do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Those of you who are in the Slack lounge, I've had a few questions about this. We are not closing the Slack lounge. Think of this as supplemental to the lounge. Think of this as a place for longer form conversations. It's good for SEO, for people to find things when they're searching on Google and, whatever all those other search engines are that nobody uses. It's good for housing conversations long term, because you know how things disappear off of Slack after a while. It's good for anything that's not JumpCloud related, because a lot of the conversations on Slack tend to be very JumpCloud focused. Well, guess what? You can have all kinds of other IT conversations right there on the forums. In fact, it's going to be very focused on all things IT, not just JumpCloud. So you'll be able to have those conversations there. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So we are looking forward to that. We've got some great other surprises in store next month, some fun contests and things that are going to be going on in social that I'm looking forward to being able to tell you more about when it happens. So stay tuned for that, because there are going to be some, maybe some fun prizes and things going on sometime really soon. So stay tuned. Have a good time.
Yeah, I might have the register on the community as not Ben Garrison at notjumpcloud.com, so I can win some of those prizes.
Yeah, good luck with that. And Ben will be in the community quite a bit, so
yeah,
even
I'm really
more places to bug him.
Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to the ability because a lot of people are posting scripts and stuff in the lounge, and I think that's fantastic. I just am afraid that some of those scripts are going to get lost because we only have the 10,000 message limit. So those will be things I'll be working to try to get those posted into the community, so that way we have those for longer term and start to build a repository from the community on those types of things. So
absolutely.
That's what I'm looking forward to personally.
Yeah, absolutely. We will be sure that we make a place for those where people can search them and find them, and just make sure that they're available much longer term, because yeah, that 10,000 limit can go really quickly when we're having a busy time of being chatty. So
Yeah. And even if it wasn't a 10,000 limit, just searching it in Slack is just so much fun. So,
yeah, I love Slack search.
Slack is awesome. Search, not so much.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks,
Yeah.
Becky. I appreciate it. So pivoting over to Alexa on our meetup updates.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, I'm Alexa Emerson. I am the community events manager here at JumpCloud. And so along with community, we had a really exciting week in Meetup World. As a reminder, meetups fall under the community, and it's just a way for us to host super informal events to get people together, to kind of have those forum conversations in person. I say in person, we were virtual all week. We had virtual events in Boston, LA, New York, and London this week, and they were a lot of fun, just getting folks together to talk about all things IT. So it was a really, like I said, a great week. We're looking forward to next week. We're actually wrapping up our February event series, with events, a virtual event in Seattle, virtual event in San Francisco, and an in-person event in Denver. So if you're in those areas, please register for those events. Again, it's just a super informal way to have those casual conversations, to bounce ideas off other IT admins, share insights, talk about problems you're going through, because I'm sure someone else is going through it. So just work through it together. Because again, a lot of times IT admins work in isolation. So just a way to talk to other people who are going through the same thing. So yeah, we're really excited to wrap up the February series, but we're even more excited to launch our March series, which we'll be doing here shortly. So make sure you're part of our IT admin community network on meetup.com, so you don't miss any announcements. So I will drop some links in the chat. But yeah, super exciting. Looking forward to more great events.
Yeah, I had a super fun time at the meetups and meeting everybody. And one thing I want to make sure I stress to everyone who comes to the meetup is that this does not have to be about a JumpCloud conversation. In fact, I live in JumpCloud world, and so I would really much appreciate to not have to live in JumpCloud world during the meetups and learn something from other IT admins about other things. So please join the meetup and come and share your best practices and your knowledge, because I'm begging you to. So thank you for that. All right. So thank you, Alexa, for a meetup update. That was fantastic. And now we're going to transition to the wonderful conversation that we've all gathered here today to undertake. And that is the basically just overall password management on Mac. And so what I hope we can do is just kind of talk about how Apple, how Mac, how the ecosystem kind of handles passwords from a rudimentary level, from a base level, and then kind of build that up and introduce File Vault, and then introduced how, an IDP, or how we as JumpCloud, how we also kind of fit into that world. And I brought two experts along the way to kind of help with this conversation. I'm pretty sure they'll say expert is loosely, but I'm pretty sure that I disagree there. But I did bring Scott Thurston and Tom Bridge. Scott, if you wouldn't just mind introducing yourself, and then Tom as well.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Thurston. I am a software engineer in JumpCloud's devices engineering organization. I work on the agent component, and much as I hate to admit it, I am somewhat familiar with the way we manage passwords on macOS devices.
And he's going to be integral. Is that the right word? Sure. In this conversation, helping add maybe some technical aspects, or even just some color commentary along the way, to help us understand kind of the whole nuances around Apple and Mac passwords. So, and then we also brought the man who needs no introductions, and I make him always go last, because anything that after that is just completely not listened to. We do have our very own Tom Bridge.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Tom Bridge. I'm the principal product manager for Apple Technologies here at JumpCloud. This is my son, Charlie. He's home from school today, not feeling so awesome, but he's going to join us for just a hot second here before he heads back to some rest and relaxation. But yeah, we want to talk about, how macOS handles user accounts, because how macOS handles user accounts is so important to our ability to talk about the access requirements and all of the things that go along with those things, whether that's the underlying secure boot technology called or excuse me, the underlying secure boot technology, the underlying file vault volume encryption key technology, the unlock screen, the JumpCloud agents login window, and a number of different pieces there. So we're excited to kind of dive in on what it means to actually do the IT tasks that we're talking about every day, whether that's provisioning users, whether that is provisioning users securely. I will keep my eyes open. Thanks, buddy. Go feel well. All right. But, in terms of this is a challenging space, right? Apple has dealt us a hand that we have to participate in. And the cards aren't all the ones that we wanted. In terms of how we go through this process. Apple's goal in all of this is to make sure that the people who have access to a given disk are the people who are supposed to. And in general, what that means is user 501, which is the first user that's placed on the machine, gets granted during its setup assistant process something called a secure token. And secure tokens are kind of at the heart of user management with regard to file vault key escrow. So when we start thinking about all of this, I think that, we should probably back up just a little bit and talk a little bit about how the APFS volumes work on macOS systems. And so from that perspective, when you have a brand new computer, comes out of its box, I've got, my spare laptop here hanging out on the disk. The environment that we've got here is that when we boot up for that very first time, the system goes into what's called Setup Assistant. Setup Assistant is that first user experience where if you're using our zero touch enrollment process or any other MDM zero touch enrollment process, you create the first user on the box. And that's always called user 501. If you look at the UID, the user ID number that's associated with the device, with that credential in Discal, which we'll talk about in just a hot second. User 501 is special because user 501 is the first user on the box, and that user gets what's called a secure token. Secure tokens are the secret that has to get passed around between users. And if you have a secure token, you can give someone else a secure token. But if you don't have a secure token, the only way to get a secure token is from someone who already has a secure token. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting paged that a screen time request has been made. And this is the penance that I have to pay for a kiddo who is homesick. So give me just 2 seconds, because if I don't, it's going to be a bad day for everybody.
That's that iOS parental controls.
I was going to say, yeah, screen time.
Very often.
I was going to say that's a separate topic for a separate day, and it should be an after hours one so that we can all be, half a glass into scotch before we even start.
Indeed.
Okay, secure tokens. Why does it matter? Secure tokens are how you get what's called a volume encryption key, and that is what is decorated to your user account. And so if a user account has a secure token, there's a key slot that's associated with that deep within the bowels of the operating system, someplace where you can't normally go. But without that key, you are not a user that can unlock the disk during first boot. The way that macOS works, whether it's an Intel system that uses the EFI boot process or an Apple M1 system that uses another kind of environment, the process for booting the computer is that what's stored on the disk in an unencrypted fashion is a stub of the operating system. It is just enough to boot the system without the encryption keys. And so that portion of the operating system is unsecured. Now, on macOS, that part of the operating system is also booted in what's called a sealed system volume. And so when you boot up that far, it gets you to the point where you can enter your username and password. That's the screen where you pick which user you are and you enter your JumpCloud password. And so that it generates the process of unlocking the rest of the boot volume so that you can proceed through to the login window. And so if you're using JumpCloud multi-factor authentication, for example, you'll see two login windows. You'll see the File Vault login window first, which has the circles by default, and you click on that button and then, log yourself in, and then get through that process. If you are requiring multi-factor authentication using JumpCloud Protect or using TOTP or, a hardware key, those are the kind of situations where you can go through and it's going to stop you. It's going to stop you and say, I need my TOTP code or I need a push alert. And that's the JumpCloud login screen for those systems. That login screen has access to the internet. The File Vault login screen does not, because your network credentials for the Wi-Fi networks that we're all so commonly on, especially here in the global panini, it's unlikely that you have a cable running to your home desk for that kind of environment. The File Vault login screen has no network access because the system keychain isn't unlocked yet, which means it can't touch the Wi-Fi, which means that's a wholly offline environment. And if your File Vault password, if your local user password is now different than it was before, bad time. So Rob asked an important question. Has anyone noticed that the first login screen for File Vault after startup, Bluetooth mice don't work? So it depends on the unit. I have one of these fancy Apple trackpads. This works at the File Vault login screen. It does pair during that process, as does my Bluetooth keyboard. So those two things should pair during the File Vault login screen experience. If you have one of those mice that has a little transceiver that's USB, it will not. System Bluetooth is available, but the USB experience is not. So James asks a good question. Is there a way to clean up how the login screen looks? The text overlaps and doesn't look great. Send me a screenshot, James. I know that you know how to reach me in the chat on the Slack. I'd love to see what you're seeing. I know that for the older MacBook Airs, the 11-inch MacBook Airs, the screen's too small. And as of macOS Monterey, it's a really complicated layout for actually passing those things together. The login screen payload sometimes results in some overlap with the actual login screens. So anyhow, what we're talking about here is kind of the password sync process and what happens when you change your password. So this is a great place for me to kind of lean on Scott just a little bit and talk about the best practice workflows, right? The best practice workflow is to always change your password in the Tray app that's while you're on a logged in session, right? And I was going to say, Scott's nodding his head. Yes, that's the best place to change your password, because essentially that is done not just at the operating system level, it's done on the JumpCloud side, and they're done together. They're done by the exact same tool. And what you get, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, and we have all the information we need in context at that time to manage all the pieces of the workflow. Can we talk a little bit about
that workflow for a real quick second? Because at that point we have to manage the system directory, the directory service that's a part of the Apple or part of the macOS operating system, as well as JumpCloud's directory, right? Like there's two pieces of the puzzle that we have to follow here.
And File Vault, if File Vault is enabled. So it has to sync across that whole process as well. So.
Right. And nominally speaking, changing it while the operating system's online, changing it from the Tray app always results in the File Vault password matching the Discal password, matching the JumpCloud password. The best way to change your password always is to change that password directly from the Tray app.
Yes. What more would you like to know about that?
Well, so maybe we can just kind of take a little technical deep dive into just kind of the workflow that the JumpCloud agent does when you change the password using the Tray app. What's some of the work behind the scenes that's being done to ensure that their JumpCloud credentials get updated, their local profile gets updated. Of course, obviously the disks are already encrypted so it can sync over with FileVault. Just kind of that whole process on what the agent is doing to kind of help with that process, and then we can talk about some of the uh-ohs and some of those pitfalls that people can fall into.
I would talk about it pretty generally. You've already mentioned most of the pieces that we're handling behind the scenes, but first and foremost, we're changing the user's directory password on the device. Okay, so that's going to validate the user when they attempt to log in at the FileVault recover or the FileVault unlock screen, and then again at the login window. We're verifying that they have a secure token, and we are going to update their login keychain password. That's also very important, especially when we get into some of our other features like device trust, where we need access to that login keychain to manage our own credentials. And then we're also going to send an update back to JumpCloud Mothership to notify JumpCloud that the user's password has changed, so we can update that in our own directory.
So I'm gonna put the voice of a customer in my head for a second. Well, that's all well and good, Scott, but my coworker and my end user forgot their password. They can't get into the Mac, and they should be able to self-serve password reset their JumpCloud credentials and be able to get into their Mac. So in that regard, because that's a position a lot of IT admins are going to take, right? Because it's a very to me, at least in my perspective, it seems like a feasible ask. So I guess what happens in the scenario where a user goes, and again, just to clarify, we're talking about a Mac that has FileVault enabled, right? Yeah. And that's where usually most of the issues, or where it gets a little more complicated, right? So what happens as far as the flow of information is concerned when someone goes to the JumpCloud user portal or wherever and they reset their password, they change their password from not within the JumpCloud agent, or if the admin changes the password from, say, the admin panel, which they can do, what's the order of operations and what happens, and then what ultimately ends up happening locally on the machine based off of the different states?
That's a good question. Let's assume that the device is running and our agent is communicating with JumpCloud. So JumpCloud's going to send an update to the agent, notifying it that something has changed in that user's authentication configuration. And that's going to trigger the password synchronization workflow, where if the user is communicating with us, either they're at our login window or they're actually logged into their device and the tray app's running, we're going to attempt to prompt them for both their old password and their new password. If they can provide both of those items correctly, then we can continue to update everything in the system, their directory password on the device, their login keychain password, and confirm that we can get them access to all of the resources they're supposed to have. Everything's well and good. On the other hand, if they don't know that old password, they can omit it from the workflow, and most everything will function correctly, with the exception of being able to update their login keychain password. We cannot do that if we do not have their old password. macOS is perfectly happy to say, great, here, have a new login keychain unlocked by your new password. We cannot do anything about that situation. So they're going to lose whatever they had stored in the original login keychain, lose access to it, I should say, because Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is still a backup copy of the database.
There's still a backup copy of the database. It's still present. If you want to take some passes at unlocking that keychain in the future, you will be able to do exactly that. You can at that point, open that, attempt to open up that backup keychain, and it will ask you repeatedly if you know the contents of that keychain. Now, it's also really important to know that Apple's iCloud service is really great at syncing your keychain. And so you can sync the contents of your keychain with your Apple ID, so that at that point, the contents of your keychain are all up in the cloud, and they're all secured by your Apple ID password. So when you sign in with your Apple ID after the next login cycle, it will sync down the contents of that keychain. You just need to authenticate again with your Apple ID.
So what about this scenario? And reason why I'm doing this is because, or doing it this way, is because I want to highlight that there is a perfect storm scenario, right? And the perfect storm scenario is also there because, well, that's just the security of the operating system. And you got to think the computer doesn't know the difference between the person who owns the machine versus someone who's just trying to gain unauthorized access into the machine, right? And so perfect storm scenario, you're at the file vault screen. You can't unlock it. You don't know a way to unlock the disk. You don't know the password. You forgot the password. You're the only user that's on the system. How do you get through that barrier, right? Because I think that's a big challenge that a lot of people are running into, is that, hey, I can't even unlock the disk because I don't know the password. Yeah. And how do I get my user back up and running without losing all of their data or having to create a new profile and go through that whole process?
Right. Well, here there's a security feature associated with the File Vault 2 disk encryption system. And that's essentially, you don't want to build a system that has no way to be recovered, right? And so as a result, if you're using the JumpCloud File Vault recovery key policy, we will escrow that key for you. If you're using another MDM, please make sure that you turn that feature on for their File Vault recovery key. So essentially, if you have the PRK, you can still unlock the disk. And so that private personal recovery key, that's right, it's called a PRK, personal recovery key. The PRK for File Vault 2 is your pass back in, because that lengthy phrase, it's what, 6 blocks of 4 characters separated, or 5 blocks of 4 characters separated by dashes. And recovery mode will help you get to the point where you can actually enter that PRK on M1 systems and from recovery. And for Intel systems, you can actually use the PRK as well from the standard login screen. And those environments are going to get you to a point where you can unlock the disk, get access to the rest of the network, and then hopefully reset your password using JumpCloud.
So if you get in a state where, hey, you just can't unlock the disk and you have the File Vault encryption key escrowed, the PRK escrowed, you can therefore unlock the disk thereby getting the system on the internet, which therefore will allow you to push a password change from the JumpCloud mothership. I'm stealing that from Scott. And then you run into those couple other scenarios where, hey, if you're using keychain, you might lose the keychain if you don't know that user's password. Or if you could take some guesses, or if you have it synced with iCloud, then those are things that can kind of overcome with that. So I guess moral of the story here is, when we start thinking about deployments, right, to Mac, and it comes around passwords, obviously if you're going to use using File Vault, there's some best practices, right? And so the best practices would be, one, always make sure that you're escrowing the File Vault key as an option. What about the recommendation that, kind of old school Tom, Scott, of, hey, let's have a break glass account. Let's have a local admin account that's on the machine that's outside of everything else. Is that still something that you would recommend to admins, or would you say, hey, that might not be necessary if you take the appropriate steps of having another way in through, like, say, the PRK and escrowing the File Vault key?
This is a philosophical choice for admins, right? Yeah. Because essentially what you have at that point is, like, for example, if you're doing this with a local user account, I mean, not managed by JumpCloud, just an account that's been logged into on the machine, because the special action, by the way, that we didn't talk a little bit about with Secure Token, is that the login screen is a special place. When a user that is marked for Secure Token logs in for the very first time, that's what generates their file vault volume encryption key. The login screen is the only place to do that. And so if you have a user, an IT user on the machine, you must log into it in order to get a file vault encryption key and have it show on the file vault boot screen. You cannot do that without passing through the login screen. That is where your account gets blessed with the volume encryption key. And that lets you at that point decrypt the drive and open it up. So if you're going to do it with a local user account, you must, I'm going to say this twice, you must log into that account at least once from the main macOS login screen. For environments where you are sending machines directly to users, especially here in the global panini, which is what I'm calling the pandemic these days, because at that point, at least I think of a delicious sandwich. But, we get to the point where IT isn't touching machines as often because there's no office.
Yeah.
So, or the office is limited in scope. And so at that point, what you're doing is if you have to log into that machine, great. You're setting up a screen share so that you can do a login session. No, that's a pain. Use the PRK. From my opinion, using the file vault personal recovery key is IT's method of accessing the systems.
So I'm going to play a little more customer devil's advocate, right? So, surely, Tom, that Apple is making this huge push to ensure that machines that are company owned or that are managed must go through MDM. So surely an MDM provider, my MDM provider, should have ways to be able to help out and circumvent some of these things. Like I should be able to push a command to just unlock and do whatever I should be able to do.
You don't want that because that's not something that would be used responsibly. If Apple has the unlock keys, and essentially, if you go and you read some of the documentation, the platform, Apple's platform security guide is one of the most amazing pieces of human-focused documentation that Apple provides. I strongly recommend that you go and read this piece of documentation that Apple provides. I'll find the link. I'll throw it in the chat here in just a few. But Apple publishes their platform security guide. Their platform security guide describes in detail how these features work and what is decodable versus what is not decodable. And you either need a PRK or you need a working volume unlock key. One of those two things is required to unlock the disk. If you're not escrowing the PRK, we have a big problem. If you're using JumpCloud, we are. So, those are the kind of things that we need to do and, have taken a lot of measures to make sure are working correctly. But, in those cases, not having a PRK or not having a password on the disk, you're not going to be able to unlock those things. Thank you, Rick, for finding the platform security guide and throwing that in there. But the platform security guide is a really phenomenal piece of documentation. It's written by security engineers, yes, but Apple has some of the best tech writers on the planet, and they've actually put that in very human-facing language.
Yes, you don't have to drink like a whole pot of coffee just to sit through it.
Yeah,
to be able. Oh, and Rob with the PDF, nice.
That's right. Now the PDF, that's the 2019 platform security guide. So be aware of that. The web documentation is the most recent version of that documentation always. So the PDF is the 2019 version. Things have changed, and the 2019 version won't have details on the Apple M1 chip and how those systems boot, which is different than how the EFI-based Intel systems boot.
Yeah, especially when
because
it comes to, like,
at
kernel
the
extensions and stuff.
kernel extensions are a little bit different because obviously there's no kexts on Apple Silicon by default. Oh, okay, so that is the 2021. All right, cool.
Perfect.
Sorry, I saw the MA 1902, which indicated to me second half of 2019 in the URL. So it sounds like there is a PDF from May. They tend to give you some of those pieces there. But from the perspective of an MDM manufacturer, we do get the unlock key. That unlock key is the file vault PRK.
Yeah. And so maybe, Scott, maybe you can also just dive in a little bit here because, hey, I just installed the JumpCloud agent on my computer and I have this account now called JumpCloud on my machine. what does that do? Can I just log into that if I run into any issues? What is that service account, or what? I kind of spilled.
You're talking about the JumpCloud service account.
Darn it!
Yes,
I'm a bad dungeon master.
Yeah. Let me put it this way: if you can figure out how to log in using that account, I really want to pick your brain, because the JumpCloud agent creates that account. We manage the password associated with it, and it is not a user account that has a shell that could run even if it logged in. Its sole purpose on that device is to be a secure token holder and a secure token grantor. So when we provision a new user to the device from JumpCloud, and the first time they go log into that device, there's got to be some other user whose credentials the agent knows who can grant the secure token to that new user account. And that is the purpose of having the JumpCloud service account on the device.
So it's kind of like the gatekeeper. Well, I don't want to say that because that's kind of confusing. So it's more like a token keeper of the secure token, where it helps to grant access to new users, to give them a secure token, and kind of help manage the secure token lifecycle.
Exactly, because that new user has to have a secure token, as Tom pointed out, in order to get a private key to unlock File Vault.
And I think the key advantage to that, because you can create a new user using a script, right? You can push a script to a user, a local admin, and you can create a user. The difference with that is if you create a user from a script, they will not receive that secure token. And so therefore they will not receive access to be able to unlock the disk unless you do some magic with coding and scripting to be able to make that happen. Typically, if you do it through a script, that's not something that actually happens. You have an MDM provider who is creating the user and therefore having a service account. Correct me if I'm wrong, I always get this confused. Is that considered like a 400 headless account? Is that right? Is it a 400 or a 401? I know 501 is the...
Yeah, that's a really good question. I honestly don't know what user ID gets associated with the JumpCloud service account. I just know it's supposed to be there.
Yeah, I was going to say it'll appear on the lock screen, or excuse me, the File Vault unlock screen, but that is the only place it will appear.
Okay. Yeah, we suppress it in the JumpCloud login window.
Correct. Yep, that's right.
So it is 100% headless. So really, when it comes down to,
there's no shell associated with it. There's no login. There's no home directory associated with it. It is not a user that will function at the login window. That's secure by design. It's not intended for use at the login screen. It's not intended to be a user that has an environment that is functional on the machine. It is there to be our secure token holder, so that we can, when we assign new users through the JumpCloud console, grant secure token to those users.
And I guess what is the, I guess I'm just kind of, no one's asking questions, guys, in chat. So I'm kind of just coming up with things that I hear through the community. So one of the questions that I've gotten a couple of times was, hey, I changed the recovery key on my Mac, but that didn't go up to JumpCloud. Is that process supposed to happen? Like if you did a FDE setup, change recovery, personal on the actual Mac, will that get caught by the agent and then escrowed into the admin panel?
Yes. So if you do go through the process of changing the recovery key manually, I don't know why you would do this, but it is possible that you can do this. We will interpret that on the next security info cycle. I wouldn't recommend getting into that practice. We periodically rotate the key ourselves. So it's not a place where you need to worry about that key being stale. We will use our credentials to do that process for you, so that there's no one secret to the machine. If they pop JumpCloud, and get access, you're not going to have an immediate decryption cycle for everybody, because that's a periodic change. James asked a good question. Can the recovery key be escrowed in more than one place? No. It should be escrowed with your MDM, or it should be escrowed with Crypt, or it should be escrowed, in the display on the screen. I don't recommend that last one, although my 1Password is full of various notes from recovery keys of customers gone past, or coworkers gone past. So I mean, the thing is, what you want is a good store of that information. And I think that it's valuable for us to talk a little bit about the command line interfaces for all of these things, because I think that that's super important for you to see as well. And let me share my screen here. Let me share a window. Let's see if I can do this.
We're going to do some cool stuff now. Here we
go. Window. Let's see. Terminal.
We have Sophos pushing that policy, and when I enabled it in JumpCloud, the computer was constantly escrowing different keys in both places. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
it sounds like you've got.
Here's the challenge, right? So for a long time, Apple devices would allow anyone with the right key to redirection profile to stash a key. That is not the case anymore. As of Big Sur and later, in order to escrow a file vault key, you must be the MDM. You must be the MDM. And so at that point, the only person who's actually got permission to do that is the MDM. And so if you're using JumpCloud for mobile device management on macOS, we can stash the key. But at that point, Sophos cannot. So, the situation there is that profile is now gated by the MDM holder and is required to be used by the MDM holder. I am having difficulty sharing my screen here. Let me see if I can fix this real quick, because I think I need to do privacy preferences policy control for screen recording, and Chrome is selected, so I don't know what's going on here.
Well, yeah, I had that same problem the other day in Google Meet, but I just figured I would just let the computer rest for a bit and think about its life choices. And
that's the important part, right? I mean, those are the kind of the things. Yeah, it's showing me ghosted here again. I may need to uninstall and reinstall Chrome at some point. My guess is the version changed underneath and the binary was not properly resigned. But there are some commands that you can use to take a look at your environment. I'm actually going to paste a couple of these into the chat. For example, they're going to include T-Bridge, which is my username. And so, for example, I posted this in chat. Discal is the directory services command line. Discal is how you interact with the operating system's local directory. And discal.-read, and then the user for T-Bridge, and then the authentication authority is going to show you some useful things. One of the things you got to look for in that environment is this, that, semicolon secure token semicolon is what's decorated onto an individual user record that says, hey, by the way, there's a key slot on the secure element for the secure token of this device. And so if you're using Discal, you can determine whether or not there's an appropriate, environment there. There's a second command that's here, and it's sysadmin CTL or sysadmin control dash secure token status, and then your username. And in this particular case, you can see that I do have a secure token available for my user. So there you can see sysadmin CTL says secure token is enabled for user Tom Bridge. Yeah. You can also use another great one, which does require admin rights. So I have to type out my really stupidly long password because I haven't fixed Touch ID for the command line yet. And that is FDE setup list. FDE setup is the old command that was used for full disk encryption, FDE, full disk encryption. It's the command line interface for File Vault. And for example, what you see here, FDE setup list will show you who has a secure token on the volume that you're on right now. You will sometimes notice that sysadmin CTL and FDE setup report different things. And there are certain circumstances where you'll end up with sysadmin secure token status will be on for a user, but they will not appear in FDE setup list. The reason for that is that they have yet to pass through the login window of an unencrypted device, or an unlocked device at that point. If you have not yet passed through the unlock volume, you will not appear in FDE setup list. And so you need to go through the process of logging in to your environment at that point. So if you do have an IT user that you deploy out to the environment and you do create them in such a way where they do have a secure token, but you have not gotten logged in with them yet, they will not appear in an FD setup list.
Which really makes you kind of think about taking a step back just a little bit, making you kind of think about like how to deploy your systems. Because when you're thinking like what you said with zero touch deployment, you're just going to be sending this machine out to an employee. They're going to log in, and that's going to be, for all intents and purposes, the only user that's assigned to that machine.
Correct.
And if you do assign an IT admin profile to it after the case or after the fact, then you're going to not have a secure token on that user until you say give the end user a password to have them log into it to be able to do that. So just different ways of being able to think about that process. So that means, definitely have a way to do like remote desktop if that's a possibility, and other ways to be able to get into the machine. Another thing you could do is do zero touch by logging in as the IT admin and then shipping it off, but that kind of also defeats the purpose of zero touch deployment. But it really comes down to your organization as to what makes the most sense, what security and compliance requirements that you have to meet with how you deploy it. But I hope that these steps and kind of understanding how all of that works helps you make a good decision and a strategy around how you're deploying, and then ultimately how to recover in case something happens, right? People are going to get locked out. They're going to enter their password too many times incorrectly. So understanding how JumpCloud manages that lockout, password expirations, making sure that people can change their password after expiration, right? And soon, I don't know, let me go back 1 second, where we will have the ability to password reset using recovery email. So that is a process, but just remember that if you do a password recovery outside of the system, outside of the JumpCloud agent, you're going to run into the scenarios that Scott highlighted, right? If you might lose your keychain if you don't know your old password, and you're going to still have to get into the recovery mode if you can't get past that file vault screen to be able to basically sync up the user to that new identity from JumpCloud to be able to even sign in to begin with. So those are some of the things that you can find also on the JumpCloud support site. So if you go to support.jumpcloud.com, you type in things like file vault recovery, password recovery, those types of things, you're going to find a bunch of articles that will pop up that kind of help with understanding how to do that. Obviously, support@jumpcloud.com can also help with that. And then also the Slack Lounge, you can come bug us in there, not bug us, but like ping us, buzz us, ping us in the Slack Lounge, and we can, I'll be there to help you understand that. But my goal for this conversation was to kind of remove the fog of war a little bit around what's happening on Mac passwords, what's happening with File Vault, and what could potentially cause a user to just be completely locked out and you have to reset the entire system. What is a scenario like that? What could cause just, hey, this is the end game, we just have to just go ahead and refresh the entire system and just blow everything away and start over? Where could you go down to get to that dangerous life?
Sure. I think that if for example, one of the ways that this could happen is if you're not managing the file vault keys for your environment, if you are letting the user turn those on themselves and then they don't write down their escrow key, guys, we got a problem. So, I mean, at that point, the JumpCloud service account will be present because they go through the login screen and it's there. We can assign another user to it, but we're not going to escrow those recovery keys, and that's a problem. So if you're intending to encrypt your devices, you need to do that at your MDM. And the best way to do that, where there's always file vault key escrow associated with it, is to do that with the file vault policy. So those are situations, if you're not managing that, you're letting your user do it, and that's a problem for recoverability. So I was going to say, James asked a good question. I let my password expire on my Mac. I was able to log in and reset my password, and I was back in. However, I noticed that my iCloud was signed out, and I had a hard time logging back in, but eventually did log in. Is that expected behavior? If you you should have gotten to the screen in that point where it asks you for your previous password. It is likely that was not provided at that point, or it was left empty and the keychain was discarded and needed to be replaced. You can sign back into iCloud at that point. You're going to have to complete an MFA check. There may be some unexpected behaviors due to the complexities of losing your keychain. Losing your keychain means the system kind of has to default back to unsigned in. And in certain cases, iCloud is not great at that. So signing out of your Apple ID, signing back in is the most likely expected behavior at that point, that you may have to complete that process.
And what do you see? What is the I guess the pitfall of allowing iCloud to manage the password on your local machine?
Well, you should never let them also manage your login password. Not ever. We don't support that. That's not a supported configuration. It's also a one that you're unlikely to get into, but it is possible to get into that circumstance even today. So, I think that it's really important that you turn that off, or not turn it on, because you have to really go hunting for that setting. Don't turn that on. Bad plan. In those particular environments where you want iCloud to manage your keychain, great, wonderful, because then it will restore when you sign back into your iCloud account. But you do have to sign back into your iCloud account at that point.
Do you think that the enhancements or the changes, and I know we're coming at the time, but now I'm just kind of asking questions because I'm a nerd and, that's just what I do. And this actually, I don't know the answer to this. So this is going to be a fact learning mission for me as well. So with the new managed app, I'm doing clap hands. I'm excited to ask this question. So with the new managed Apple ID, not new, but with the changes to that, right? So say, for instance, could an IT admin organization kind of make it a policy that says, hey, when you first get your machine, you need to log in to your iCloud account managed Apple ID, right? In order to sync up the keychain. Could that be a strategy? And then what are some of the advantages or disadvantages to kind of doing that? Or would you even recommend just not even using keychain in that regard?
Well, I mean, I strongly recommend using managed Apple IDs where appropriate to do so. Managed Apple IDs have fewer features than standard Commerce Apple IDs. Think of Commerce Apple IDs as ones that work in the App Store, ones that work with all of iCloud's features, and things along those lines. So the managed Apple IDs are a subset of those environments. And so if there are things that you are doing with your organization that require, if you intend for admins to have access to the App Store for their own use, or end users to have access to the App Store for their own use, you can't rely on keychain syncing. You can't rely on those kind of things, because essentially the admins, the users out of your control for that. Managed Apple IDs do not work in the App Store. You have to deliver apps to them directly using VPP. So be aware of that. There's a difference there between managed Apple IDs and Commerce Apple IDs. So
Apple IDs, iCloud's really good for personal devices, right? I can sync up, be part of the Apple ecosystem. I can share my data through my phone, my watch, my iPad, my everything, and everything is fantastic. When you start bringing in the world of corporate owned and information and DLP, all that kind of good stuff, that's where things get a little more complicated. But yeah, so awesome. Well, Scott, Tom, was there any last thoughts or things that we didn't cover that you feel is very important that we should just touch on before we end today?
Yeah, I know there's some documentation updates coming from us that includes a bunch of brand new flowcharts for how it works when you reset a password and you've got multiple Macs. So, when there's a place where you've got one Mac that's your primary and a second one that's also in use, and there's password changes that happens there. So we will have some updates to the documentation that include those flowcharts. If you want to reach out to me on the JumpCloud Lounge for those password reset flows, I'm happy to provide them, especially versions. If you have a second directory in the mix, if you're using Okta upstream, there's a different set of instructions that come along with all these things. I think what's really important here is that you have to decide whether or not you think a password reset policy on a regular schedule is actually helping you or not. With the presence of MFA, especially push MFA, online MFA, you have the ability to lift your password policy resets from 90 days to a much longer period. NIST has provided updated guidance that basically says password reset policies are not as important as we once thought they were. So if you want to get to the point where you're lifting your password reset policy because you're using JumpCloud Protect every day, and you're using that environment here to, properly secure your login credentials, lift those requirements. Make it a longer password, but you don't need to change it. Changing passwords is highly disruptive to your end users, and is not actually worth all that much in terms of security. So rethink your reset policies, I think, is what it comes down to. Now, people are still going to forget their policies, and you still want to cover their environments. That's what the File Vault personal recovery key is for. And so have a good method and practice it, tinker with it. Use that environment. So, I see Joel saying, we eliminated password reset policies, get FIDO keys instead. Absolutely. Do those things, revisit your policies that are user hostile. And
changing passwords often makes users cut corners and actually can be a less secure approach. Absolutely.
I was going to say, how many people used to have the Post-it note on the underside of their keyboard that was their current password, or had it on a sticky note waiting on the monitor? So yeah, James says he's waiting on fingerprint login for Windows with MFA enabled. Oh, do we have plans for you? Talk to me offline, James. I'm happy to talk with you on usability there, because I love the Windows Hello flow for accessing your desktop. I think that's a really good use of secure policies that's both biometric and pin-based, and requires a 90-day reset period or 90-day refresh period for those tokens. There's a lot of really great things to love in the Windows security model, and Windows Hello is absolutely one of them. I would love to see Apple go to that approach, where we can basically say, here's a pin, and then we'll do MFA at the login window. I'm really hopeful that we get some login window improvements from Apple in this summer season, because we're due. Apple, does the TikTok release cycle, and so this year we're due a tick as opposed to Monterey's talk. So I'm hopeful for some good stuff there.
You heard it here, folks. Heard it here first, folks. Tom wishes Apple was more like Microsoft. Okay, so
with security, with so many things, that's actually true. I will actually have that conversation. I am not by any means an Apple supremacist, except about all of the usability functions that are built into macOS. File Vault encryption, that actually works, and a key escrow that is actually device secure. In terms of the secure enclave as opposed to the TPM, which I kind of don't love quite nearly so much. So
I think that opens up another conversation for how Windows does passwords between TPM, BitLocker, and now they're doing this cool thing where they're sending device, not now, but they've been doing this thing. You probably ran into it as an IT admin, where you order a computer from, say, a vendor like an IBM or a Dell or whatever the case is, and it comes to you, and it already has the BitLocker status in a pending state. And it's basically essentially waiting for you to sign in with a Microsoft account. And when you do so, it turns on BitLocker automatically, which is kind of an issue when it comes to, like, say, BitLocker policies and that kind of stuff, because it's in a pending status. So that's a whole other ball of wax that we could probably have a whole other conversation about. But we are also at time. So I wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to thank Scott. I know Scott's got a lot on his plate right now today, as well as Tom. So I appreciate them taking the time today to step away and talk to me and talk to you all about Mac passwords. Also, if you're not part of the JumpCloud Slack Lounge, which is a link, I believe, right below Scott's picture there in the middle of the screen, click that little green button. I'm sure, or teal button. I'm sure everybody is. Let's all try to point. Let's see. Am I getting it, or it's over here? I can't tell. Anyway, so
it's right underneath you for me. So
okay. Join there. Join the IT Hour Slack channel. And what I want to do is I want to start to have more conversation with you all, the viewers, on what you would like to have conversations around and see and talk through. And then obviously we want to bring in some experts, and not just JumpCloud related, but I want to talk about things as far as like Linux. Like maybe we can bring in a Linux expert that really knows the intricacies of Linux, because that's not this guy. I don't know. I know how to log in. I know Ubuntu fairly well, and I can probably break my Linux environment pretty quickly. But that's pretty much about it. So other than that, I appreciate everyone. This will be on YouTube, and so you can watch it. It'll also be here on Crowdcast as well. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. And if you're in the United States, happy President's Day on Monday. So thanks, everyone. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Be well.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.